Mr. Blois, welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for being here.
Happy New Year, Mike.
Happy New Year to you as well. So in the days leading up to this trip that you guys are about to embark on to China, Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan had said that he'd like to see tariffs on Canadian canola, pork, and seafood completely removed. What do you say to the premiers and to the people who are looking to this trip and hoping that there is that type of resolution out of it?
What I would say, a few things. Let's take a step back. First of all, to my good friend Premier Moe, we've had a good working relationship. It started all the way back in September when I had the privilege of joining him to engage with Chinese authorities on those very same questions. But I think it's important for the Canadian people to understand that this has been a building block process that the Prime Minister has undertaken, frankly, starting back to the summer of 2025 with his engagement with Premier Lee. It followed up with an engagement again with Premier Lee at UNGA, and then I happened to be in the room and had the privilege of seeing the bilateral with President Xi and the Prime Minister. The first time that had happened in 8 years, and I think that's important. So the Prime Minister feels as though we have to be able to get back to a pragmatic and a recalibrated relationship. Next week's trip is all about that. Yes, of course, some of the trade irritants that are in the window will be part of that agenda, but it is broader than that, and I think it's important to explain to the Canadians, China is the second largest economy in the world, Canada's second largest trading partner, and the Prime Minister sees opportunity for partnership and cooperation. He's been very clear that there will be certainly guardrails in the relationship, but that we have to be at the table having this dialogue.
But the people in those industries are looking at this meeting and at this trip and hoping for something to come out of it because they are being so deeply affected by the tariffs. I mean, 100% tariff on canola oil, meal, and peas, 76% on Canadian canola seed and imports that are going into China. So are you trying to manage expectations and saying that there will be no relief coming out of this?
I'm trying to say that the purpose of the trip, of course, includes elements that you're talking about, but I also want to make sure that Canadians understand that this is part of a broader partnership and cooperation that the Prime Minister sees that is longer term. We're, of course, going to be having dialogue and engagement on those very issues that started back in September with the Premier when I was there. We've had multiple ministers involved, Minister Anand, Minister McDonald Sidhu, the Prime Minister, of course, himself. So yes, Mike, this is part of the conversation. What I would want Canadians who are in these sectors that are being impacted to understand is the government is engaging in this work. We understand the importance of what it means. Like anyone who is involved in the type of conversations that are around trade irritants, I'm not going to necessarily come on national television and talk about it with great detail, other than to say to reassure Canadians at home that it is part of the agenda of what the Prime Minister, along with other elements that we're trying to accomplish with the trip.
I take that point, but I think a lot of Canadians also want to know, what is Canada willing to give up in order to get relief on all of those trade irritants and those tariffs?
What I would say to that, Mike, is we understand, look, I'm from Atlantic Canada. You mentioned canola and pork, obviously important. Seafood is part of this as well. We know what that means to our coastal communities, and we also know that there's sensitive domestic sectors at the same time. Again, I'm not going to go into the further details. I know that's your job to ask, but any decision the government will take and the work that the Prime Minister is doing is focused on making sure that we're balancing and meeting the interests of Canadians every single day. And I do want to highlight that of course, yes, we're here to talk about China, but this is part of the broader work that the Prime Minister and the government is doing around building out and doubling non-U.S. trade over the next 10 years. I mentioned China is our second largest trading partner, but the Prime Minister has been doing this work in the Pacific with South Korea, with Indonesia, with the trade agreement that we were established, along with Thailand, where we're certainly intensifying the ability to get a trade agreement there. And after China, he's headed to Qatar, and he's also going to Switzerland, again, focused on inward investment. I would point to the fact that with UAE, as it relates to the Middle East, $70 billion worth of foreign direct investment. That is the largest investment that is committed in the country's history. Hard for you and I to think through what 70 billion is, but it's transformational, and it's part of what the government is doing, what the Prime Minister is focused on every single day.
And I can appreciate those other elements, but I mean, part of the reason that I'm asking so much on China is specifically because you were at that at those meetings with Scott Moe, and because of the upcoming trip that we know is happening next week, and because China's ambassador to Canada came on this program and on Question Period with Vashi Kapelos, and Wayne Dee said in October that his country's tariffs on Canadian canola would be removed if the EV levies are dropped on Chinese EVs coming into Canada? Is that something that Canada is willing to do?
I want to go back. You mentioned Premier Moe in your preamble to your question. I think Premier Moe was on with Vashi earlier this week, and he would have been asked the question about, of course, the things you're talking about, and of course, we all know that that's important. The Premier also believes that the engagement writ large. So, yes, this will be part of our agenda. I think it's also important to look at broader cooperation, but the Premier believes, regardless of what will transpire next week, on the things that you're mentioning that are very specific and real, and I understand that, that the Prime Minister is doing the right thing to go and actually have an engagement. It bears repeating. It has been 9 years since a Prime Minister has gone to China. This is the second largest economy in the world. It had been 8 years before there had been a leader-to-leader meeting. That in and of itself is an important reason to engage with President Xi, with senior leadership. That is a result of the Prime Minister's work in this domain. I was in Korea at APEC when President Xi, this is his words, called that meeting a turning point in the relationship. So next week is a continuation of the building blocks that we've been doing.
But because of that, that's why I'm asking. I mean, is Canada ready to take down or even lower the tariffs on Chinese EVs to try and get some more movement there and relief for Canadian companies?
What I would say is when Minister LeBlanc was involved in conversations with the United States, he wouldn't come on and necessarily talk about a dialogue that's happening at that level.
He would say what was in the realm of possibilities, and I understand and I appreciate you're not going to negotiate on this show on what you are and aren't willing to do, but I think there are Canadians in these industries that are looking to your government and hoping that you have their best interest at heart, and they want to know what kind of movement they can expect.
They don't need to hope. They can be assured that the Prime Minister and this government every single day on this particular file has been focused. I've been very clear that part of the agenda of the Prime Minister's travel next week will include the things that you're talking about. We are very alive and real to the challenges that Canadian exporters of agricultural products and seafood, what this means to have market access, but I would say also the broader economic relationship for businesses in Canada writ large. If we are going to be serious about doubling the non-U.S. exports around the world, China plays a part of that. Other countries are part of that as well, but we have to make sure that we're having this dialogue. We're going to continue to stay focused on that. I know you want to flush me out a little bit on the dynamic. I'm not in a position to talk about, but we know that this matters, and what I would want to reassure stakeholders who are concerned about this is that every single day we'll put Canadian interests first and foremost.
One of the concerns I think a number of people have also mentioned about this trip and making sure that there are fences around it is foreign interference. We know that the UG Commission had said that China was one of the, it concluded that transnational repression in Canada was a genuine scourge, and that the People's Republic of China was the most active perpetrator of foreign interference targeting Canadian democratic institutions. What assurances are you going to have when you come out of that meeting that China is being told, or what is Canada planning to tell China about foreign interference in Canada?
There are existing law and security forms that China and Canada have established over a number of decades, but those are only beneficial and useful so long as that there's a political relationship that allows officials to get in the room and actually have some of those difficult conversations that you're mentioning.
So that will be part of the conversation? It's on the agenda?
What I'm saying is that this is part of what we are seeking to establish, is getting back to the table so that we can have difficult conversations on this. The Prime Minister mentioned in his bilateral and the press releases, or sorry, the press conferences after in Korea, that was raised. So I'll point you to that point where the Prime Minister referenced it himself. But I want to make the point, Mike. It's easy to talk about these things and say, well, we ought to do something about them, and we are. But if you're not at the table, if you don't have the political respect at the highest level, it's very difficult to even get in the room and be able to raise your case and to be able to make these things heard. Part of what the continuation of this relationship build is on is to make sure that at the most senior level, Prime Minister to President, there's a respect level there, which there has been. I've seen it firsthand. That opens up the opportunity to have the more difficult conversations. The Prime Minister's been very clear that there'll be areas where we will not cooperate or areas where we disagree, but there is also areas where we can cooperate. I think about things like environment and climate change. Energy security. We already ship a lot of energy into the Asia region. China is a large client of Canadian energy. Those are opportunities to build out partnership. We think that there's opportunities to cooperate while also recognizing that there's areas where we're going to disagree and where there'll be guardrails where we're not going to cooperate.
Is foreign interference one of those areas where you think you won't agree?
The Prime Minister has laid out his own guardrails in terms of what that represents. What I think it's important is that we have a channel to be able to raise this in earnest. We have not had that channel for 8 years, Mike. We are now working to reestablish it in good faith, such that those forms and mechanisms that I talked about, including the law security form, between officials can actually be utilized. Because if there's not a relationship at the highest level that is built on the Chinese having respect for our leader, and again, the President has been very clear that he sees this as a turning point. The atmospherics in the meeting that I was privy to were very positive. That's going to allow us to have channels where we can talk about cooperation, where we can talk about partnership, and areas where we're going to have more difficult conversations, but we have to actually be at the table, and that's what next week is about. It's not just about trade and opportunity, which of course is a big focus and a lot what people want to talk about, but it also gives us the opportunity to have that engagement at the highest level.
Last question for you. What does success in terms of an outcome of this meeting look like for yourself and the Canadian government?
Well, I think what I would say is there's been a building block of success. This is the next stage of what the Prime Minister has been after since, again, back in about June of 2025. Success looks like the continuation of dialogue. We're obviously raising the trade pieces that you talked about, and we'll see where we can go. Obviously, the Prime Minister views that there's opportunity for partnership long-term and cooperation. I don't want to give away what may happen next week, but the fact that the trip is happening in and of itself is important, and it's part of the Prime Minister's leadership that he was personally invited. And that's the last piece I'll say. The President personally invited the Prime Minister to go. That is a sign of goodwill as we try to build out this relationship, and I think it's a really important week next week.
But is it a failure if you don't come back with some relief on tariffs?
There'll be commentary, I'm sure, from all corners of the country. We live in a democracy. What I'm saying is the trip in and of itself is an important stepping stone. I'm confident there will be outcomes and deliverables from next week that are going to be, certainly we can point to success. And to the points that you've raised today, we're well aware of them, and they're being worked on.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Kody Blois, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it.